going to have a panel now and on health innovation's power to transform lives. I'm going to bring up Dr. Rasu Shrestha, who is the Chief Innovation Officer for UPMC, and he will bring on his panelists. Dr. Shrestha.
Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Rasu Shrestha. I'm a radiologist by background, and I'm the Chief Innovation Officer at UPMC. We'll get straight into this. I really want to make this an engaging 40 minutes of your morning today. And we're going to be talking about health innovation's power to transform lives. Right? So as much as we talk about health and care and technology, at the end of the day, it really is about transforming lives. So that's what we're going to talk about today. And to help me in this dialogue and this discussion, I have two esteemed panelists that I'll bring up on stage. Very quickly, first and foremost is Dr. George Mazarigos. And George, do you want to come on stage? Please. George is the Chief of Pediatric Transplantation at the Children's Hospital of Pittsburgh at UPMC. George is absolutely a spectacular physician and a leader globally, renowned for pediatric transplantation, and has been doing a number of things around liver and intestinal disease. He's also really pushed the boundaries of research when it comes to refining immunosuppression therapy to improve transplant outcomes and quality of life. And what I really appreciate about George, and you'll see this in the discussions that we're having today, is how he's really he's able to tap into the most humanistic aspects of what it means to provide the level of care that it requires for the patients that he sees in the care that he provides. Next, I'm going to introduce to you a dear friend of mine, Dr. Andrew Watson. Andrew? Thank you. Dr. Andrew Watson, whom hopefully many of you already know, is the Vice President of Clinical Information Technology Transformation at UPMC. Dr. Watson also works with the International Division at UPMC and does a lot of speaking engagements globally. Dr. Watson is also the President-elect of the American Telemedicine Association. When we talk about telehealth and virtual care, he is the leader that's really transforming the face of what it means to move medicine from the bricks and mortar hospitals that we've known it to be in to where it is today, which is in your smartphones and in your homes and where you live, work, and play. Dr. Watson is a leader in applying healthcare technology to the delivery of high-quality, patient-centered medicine. He's a fourth-generation surgeon based out of here in Pittsburgh, and just absolutely love the work that he does through and through. So with that introduction, I'm going to jump straight into what I hope will be an engaging conversation. So Simeon set us straight by talking about the need for us to really look at and the partnerships that exist within the region here, as well as globally. Then Dr. Ali Al-Kavazi talked about the healthcare segment and how it is absolutely critical to us both from a partnership perspective, but also pushing the limits of business and healthcare transformation. Our good friend Dr. Derek Angus really talked about the need for science and academic rigor to really push the boundaries of taking us from where we are to where we need to be. And Dr. Paolo Fontes elaborated further the specifics of breakthroughs in startup companies. What we'll talk about here is to really take it to the next level and go specifically into an area of healthcare around virtual care and telemedicine, and how we're using the power of technology and innovation to really transform lives. So what I'm going to do is really, I think I'll sit down here if you don't mind. All right. I'm amongst friends. Can you hear me all right? So I'm going to make this fairly conversational. And Andrew, since you're to my left here, maybe we'll start with you. So everyone knows about telemedicine and telehealth, and it's really interesting, right? So telemedicine, I see it as this overnight success story, 30 years in the making. everyone's talking about how remarkable telemedicine is and how it's going to transform the face of healthcare, but it's been a long time coming, right? So my question to you is, what took it so long, and are we there yet?
Well, first of all, it's a pleasure to be here with my esteemed panelists, and Rasu is a tremendous world leader in healthcare, so it's a real honor to be here. One of the challenges we had in telemedicine is I'm an actively practicing colorectal surgeon, so I'm the dirty one of the group up here, I guess. And physicians have said no to a number of things over the course of history, including hand washing, DNA, antibiotics, transplantation, and DHRs. And it's cultural change. It's a big change for us on the provider side because we used to take horses to work, and we used to use pens, and we used to have landlines, and now we have electric cars, self-driving cars. Has anyone seen the self-driving 18-wheeler yet in Pittsburgh? It's the only clean 18-wheeler you'll ever see. It's spotless, so that's how you can recognize it. But our society has changed tremendously right now, and it's hard for providers and healthcare systems to catch up because we are in the face of a quantum leap in terms of how we look at healthcare with accountability and financing. And in the middle of this is the consumer electronics market. And what we're seeing right now is that Google, Apple, and Verizon, and companies like UPMC as well, are moving the boundaries beyond what we ever would have imagined. Who here has 2 cell phones? Don't raise your hands. Who here has a drone? Who's got a drone? Raise your hand. Come on. No one else has a drone? It's absolutely fabulous. You have to get one, and why they're still legal and unlocked. But I took my drone yesterday and flew it 1,000 feet high, 2 miles away at my little farmhouse, and it's just incredible where we've come with the consumer electronics market. But what that means is that it's empowered patients and thus empowered telemedicine or telehealth. And so what we're seeing heretofore, it was a providers experimenting with technology, and now it's consumers demanding it through their own devices. And at the Apple Store now, you can get a couple peripherals to monitor your blood pressure and your pulse ox and your weight. So the long and the short of it is that there were the early phases, so to speak, of telemedicine, and it's now about to hit real time. At the national level, we think we're about maybe 2 years away from the full force of it, but it's almost here because of consumer demand and the pure commoditization of technology. And you are also a huge geek like myself, and you know what we're talking about. Absolutely. So I think folks in the room, you'll see this being commoditized in the next 2 years, and it's a highly disruptive force, but a fabulous one.
Thank you, Andrew. Absolutely, a fellow geek here, along with my esteemed panelists. The other thing I have in common with my panelists here is that, as you've probably recognized, we're all from UPMC. And what's interesting about UPMC, and a couple of words was said about this earlier as well, is that we continue to grow. We continue to transform the face of healthcare through the region here, but internationally as well. And for those of you who don't know, UPMC has essentially 4 key divisions. One is the Provider Services Group, where we have now close to 40 hospitals, about 4,000 physicians. The other is a payer arm, so we're our own health insurance as well, and we cover about 3.5 million lives. The third is, and this is really important for our discussion today, is UPMC International, that Andrew leads the charge in as well. And UPMC International has lots of interest internationally, and our goal is to create these centers of excellence in specific geographical areas globally, and export the expertise that we've managed to really grow out of Pittsburgh. And then the fourth entity at UPMC is UPMC Enterprises. That's also where I park my car every morning, and this is the innovation and entrepreneurship arm of UPMC, where we're actually transforming the face of healthcare by reinventing the future of healthcare. We're birthing companies. We're actively investing into a lot of companies. Earlier this year, Rock Health, which is a group out of Silicon Valley, gave us an award for being the most prolific corporate VC investors in all of healthcare. And this was just for the work that we did in the last year. So we've been very active in the last decade or so in this realm for as long as I've been here, and even longer. UPMC has had a very long history in innovation that really goes back. So I wanted to bring it down to a specific example of how it is that we're innovating, how it is that we're actually transforming healthcare. And out of the many hospitals that we have at UPMC is Children's Hospital. So for those of you who have not been to Children's Hospital, it's absolutely worth a visit. So before you go to Disneyland, go to our Disneyland, which is really here, which is the Children's Hospital. It really is a remarkable place for kids to come in when they're sick and to feel that they're a human being. Because it is just that transformational. So what I wanted to ask you, George, is I really wanted you to elaborate on how the Children's Hospital of Pittsburgh is transforming pediatric medicine and how you see this really leading the charge when it comes to this pursuit of leveraging technology to transform the delivery of healthcare. And I know there's a video that we're trying to segue into, and maybe would open it up to remarks as well.
Sure. Thank you, Asu, and thank you. And it's great to be here with my colleagues and this great gathering. More importantly, I think it's exciting to be here with you, the audience and the participants from around the world who understand the challenges and the needs on a day-to-day basis and the opportunities. So we're glad and honored to be here with you. I think for Asu's question about how we at Children's Hospital really attempt to really bring together the best in care to the needs of the children that we're caring as well as the world, I think the keys to that really have focused around bringing the best in care, but also keeping the relationship to the patient, to the family, and bringing all those elements, not neglecting the real personal and critical relational needs that every child, every patient comes to us every day. And trying to extend the quality not just to our hospital, but really around the world. We did cue a small, short video that summarizes some of those elements, and if our colleagues in the back can put it out, maybe we'll spark some conversation after that.
Children's Hospital of Pittsburgh is really leading in transformational medicine by addressing a long-term view of health for children. One of the great examples is our Center for Rare Disease Therapy. The Center for Rare Disease Therapy is focusing on children that often have no place left to go. We have really taken the approach to try to find the best therapy for the child that we're taking care of. These can involve novel medical therapy, novel surgical therapy, or even innovative therapy such as gene therapy. Right now there are drastic differences in outcomes across the United States for solid organ transplant recipients. Our aim through providing care through a network of care domestically is to bring together our expertise with population in areas that will benefit from that expertise outside of Pittsburgh by actually having our surgical teams perform the liver transplant in those regions, helping to and working with the local experts. We also are committed to try to improve the care and the results for the long term in whatever country, whatever region children are coming from. And one thing that's resulted in is an ongoing effort and collaboration with centers that are caring for children that are back home after their transplant. And the way we do this is really through telemedicine. Much of the focus of our care is really ensuring that these children continue to have good results that will be lifelong. We're passionate about changing outcomes for children around the world. The results that we've seen shouldn't be limited to the United States, and we're excited about taking that on a global scale to help the children who need it.
Remarkable. At the end of the day, it's those smiles. That's what it's really about. As fellow clinicians, we understand this. But as we're all working in healthcare, we can all relate to the need for us to really, the ethereal need for us to get to those smiles. Healthcare is a journey. Healthcare, by today's definition, is also something that we only go to at perhaps the most dire times in our lives, when we have a kid who needs care at the Children's Hospital, when we have a loved ones that needs to be seen by a specialist somewhere. And for us to have access to these technologies, for us to have access to these expertise is absolutely remarkable. We live in a great time today where we can truly capitalize on the science, the academia, as well as the technology and the innovative spirit of a company like UPMC to transform the face of healthcare. George, let's stick with you for just a little bit, because we heard about the Center for Rare Disease Therapy. If you could just elaborate and tell us a little bit more about that center and tell us why it's so unique.
Sure. Thank you, Rasu. The exciting thing about the Center for Rare Disease is that it allowed better networking of existing expertise, as well as an environment where we could link those experts and really address new problems, rare diseases. And at the Children's Hospital, based on taking our existing expertise in metabolic disease, for example, genetics and metabolism, and our goals of serving the patients that were coming to us, we identified that the Center for Rare Disease Therapy would be a natural way to reorganize and synergize among over 30 different specialties that were already working, taking down those silos between those specialties. For example, getting our bone marrow team talking with our genetic team, talking with our solid organ transplant group, and really addressing, meeting regularly, talking in a not just a single disease topic or single clinical group, but bringing representatives from those clinical groups together on a regular basis in ways that really the hospitals aren't usually set up to do, and then talk about the patients that were coming to us and what the opportunities were. And one of the exciting spin-offs of this has been that we've realized that the field of medicine, just as Dr. Watson talked about how it's really exploded from a telemedicine point of view, there are diseases that we're caring for now with transplant cell therapy or combinations of therapy that weren't being addressed just 5 years ago. And so we've seen several new diseases that have come through diagnostic testing, through innovative therapies, that we've come to be able to offer these therapies, these patients, new therapies that are changing their lives that we literally were not known 5 years ago. And it's really happened because of the ability to bring together these experts from the different fields that we're working in the hospital, also connecting them with experts in different regions of the United States or internationally where different expertise may exist, bringing those together and then asking the question, what is the best therapy now? What is the best therapy potentially for these very rare diseases? And that's led to successful solid organ transplants, as well as successful innovative medical therapies. And next week we hope to start a gene therapy trial for one of our medical conditions called Crigler-Najjar. That's really spun out and been birthed out of this type of collaboration that we're trying to do on a regular basis.
That's wonderful. And I've talked about this before as well, but I truly do believe that the future of healthcare is going to be built on the shoulders of the strongest of partnerships. At Pittsburgh, you might have noticed, for those of you who are new to Pittsburgh, that we have lots of bridges. Right? We're the city with the most number of bridges in any city globally. I think more than 440 bridges. Is that right, Andrew? Yeah. And I always talk about the need for us in healthcare to build more bridges, for us to really build bridges between collaborators, between nations, between really smart people that just happen to be living and thriving in different parts of the globe. And that brings us to telemedicine. And George, you talked earlier about telemedicine and some of the work that you're doing. And Andrew, you're leading the charge in telemedicine globally. Frankly speaking, does telemedicine have a role in the future of transformed healthcare?
I don't see how healthcare in the future exists without telemedicine, and will probably be about a third of it, the best that we can tell right now, maybe up to half of it. And the reason why we say that is because if you look at our roots, all of us, and my work in the international division and traveling extensively to Europe and other locations, our roots are all very similar, that healthcare is a very personal journey and process and challenge, but it was designed to really be at the homes. It was not designed to be urbanized and mechanized and subspecialized. We need that. We need those services, but they shouldn't be the axis of all of it. And it really is supposed to be at the homes and the communities and at work. And that's where it was always designed to be. We've been able to monetize it in many ways in the United States in these urban settings. And so telemedicine and telehealth is just the natural evolution of healthcare in a digital world. It's just taking healthcare back to its homes and roots. And one of the fears we have, speaking to you as a physician and surgeon, is that the consumers are going to demand this, the patients are, and I don't blame them, because I had a patient that I saw, and she came and I said, how are you doing? I checked her wound. Do you have any diarrhea? Are you eating? It's standard post-operative visit. It's charming for lunch. And she said, I live 5 minutes from one of your hospitals, and it took her an hour to get here. And it was a wake-up call that traveling is terrible for patients. It's not fun. It's expensive. We've had a patient's family die coming to see their daughter. It's just not fun. And so if we can take healthcare back to the homes, we certainly believe that we're going to have better insights in the patient care, better long-term care, better preventative care, better well care, better specialist care that's coordinated. I don't see how any patient-centered medical home can exist without telemedicine. There's no viable long-term care model that I see that can exist in the future without telemedicine. And quite frankly, it's going to be commoditized and the consumers will demand it. They have rate cards online. If you want to see a radiologist, it's $50. You want to see a surgeon, it's maybe $5, speaking metaphorically, of course. But they have these rate cards that you can even get specialist visits at your home. So we certainly see that the incredible work being done at Children's, what George has described, there's so much we can do at the homes. And once the patients figure this out, they're going to be all over this because it's cheaper, faster, better, and it's just simply more humane. And so our view of healthcare in the future it's just taking healthcare back to its roots. And there is an example of this is laparoscopy that I was trained by a series of surgeons, including my father, to use scalpels, and now I use 5mm ports and chopsticks basically to do minimally invasive surgery. And there was a huge rush at this in 2002, and it was evil, and it was experimental, and it was witchcraft, and it was bad for the patients, and it's just the standard of care. And we heard the same about EHRs, we've heard the same about transplantation, we've heard the same about DNA. And these days, laparoscopy, we don't even make that big of a deal of it, it's just surgery. And so telemedicine is just medicine. We need to forget about the prefix and just focus on the fact it's just medicine in a digital age. And one of the really key points behind that is that there's two prevailing worlds of thought here that when did our society change? If you look back in the last 200 years, our society changed in the late 1800s with the factories. Another big change clearly was the nuclear era and the dropping of the atomic bomb. It changed us forever. But the last change of the digital world either came in 2001 or 2007, because I'm not sure what had a bigger impact on our society. Was it 9/11 or the iPod? Because they came 42 days apart. But regardless, we are in a world now, since 2001 to 7, that's completely different than before that. And in that world, we need to think differently, and we can do a lot for our patients and do a lot better for them. So to me, it's a journey of taking it back to our patients where it belongs, and we can do that in the Middle East, we can do it here in Pittsburgh, we can do it around the world, but the net vector is the patients get better and benefit, and that's what it's really all about.
That's a great answer, Andrew. Thank you. So we'll stick with Andrew for just a little bit longer and push this conversation a little bit further, because, as you were talking, one of the things that I was thinking about was how we've come along. In the last 20, 30 years in healthcare, this embrace of digital has just been absolutely remarkable. At UPMC right now, we have 27 petabytes worth of data. It's doubling every 18 months. So there's conversation earlier about big data, and there'll be more conversations this afternoon about artificial intelligence and machine learning, and Steve Wozniak, the co-founder of Apple, is going to be here as well, talking about transformation through data. And what's really interesting is in healthcare, we've moved from analog and the culture of analog to digital. Right? So that's where we are today. We're slowly moving from just doing digital to being digital, meaning we're thinking about things digitally. And I think, Andrew, that the definition of healthcare is actually shifting from it just being about really managing illness and sick care to really it being about wellness. And telemedicine and virtual care and remote patient monitoring, these are all sort of coming together right now to really help in that redefinition of what it means to have this point in healthcare, right? So my question to you is not why we do it, because I think we all know why we do healthcare, but where does healthcare actually take place in this new world that we're talking about?
That's a great question, Russ. So we always ask the question, what's the point of healthcare? Because A, it's misinterpreted and gets your dander up a bit and gets you thinking, but it's not why we do it, but where we do it.
Yeah.
There's a currency in everything that we do. There's a currency in our discourse. We're speaking the English language. There's many languages that we can use. There's a currency how we interact with our peers, our spouses, our friends, our kids. There's a currency about how we drive to work. There's a currency about our laws. There's a currency in the economy. And we're struggling with in healthcare is, where does healthcare actually belong and where does it take place? It may not be designed to be in hospitals and offices. It's supposed to take place somewhere. I just don't think we know where that is right now. You certainly need hospitals and offices, absolutely. You need all the providers, nurses, doctors, allied health professionals. But truly, the question has now been raised is, where does it take place? And I don't think we know the answer to that. But a lot of the work that we've learned from you at Enterprises, and also a lot of the work that Children's has done as one of the telemedicine leaders in the world, is that there's a whole aspect of healthcare that takes place in the cloud. It's outside of the hospitals and offices. And that's really the true potential of this, because when you look at accountable care, if you look at HEDIS measures, star ratings, risk-bearing entities, bundles, all of these new healthcare terms, I don't see how any of those entities and arrangements that are both business and clinically designed can exist without healthcare leaving the traditional edifices of the hospitals and the offices. So it's uncomfortable to say that. I'm not trying to be a gadfly, but it's just the absolute logic of what's happened. And so we, as UPMC, has really done a very good job at looking at this. But at the national level, with the American Telemedicine Association, we're looking very carefully at what this means. And one of our greatest areas of interest right now is remote patient monitoring. It's a terrible word because it's not just remote, it's not just monitoring, but it's how do you work with patients at home using these peripherals of blood pressure cuffs and pulse ox, asking them questions and pushing videos. We're going to be turning our homes into little mini clinics. And what that means to us as healthcare providers and professionals remains to be determined. But it's all very exciting, and it's all for the good of the patients, and they will get better through this. I can guarantee you that.
That's great. And so I think, in summary, where healthcare is going is really where it needs to be, right? Wherever it needs to be, that's where it's going, right? So if care needs to be in the operating room, through the power of collaboration, and George, everything you talked about, we're bringing that specialized care, the research, the academic rigor, the clinical finesse, the technological capabilities to that operating room. But if it needs to be at home, in that smartphone, in that pocket, that's where it's going as well. George, I want to come back to you and dive a little deeper into the work that you're doing at Children's. Children's has initiated the first ever pediatric transplant network, which I think is absolutely remarkable given the dire need that these kids are in. So tell us how it works and what you aim to accomplish through this pediatric transplant network.
Thank you, Rasu. Briefly, what we really identified as the critical need, Rasu, was that rather than trying to think of a center traditionally focusing on optimizing care in its own walls and borders for its own patients, we recognized that our responsibility really was greater than that. And that while we wanted to maintain and continue to improve outcomes for our children that were coming to us here at Children's Pittsburgh and at UPMC, really the opportunity was to make a design or a network that would allow us to really take expertise and the years of experience that are gained that are difficult to reproduce for a rare disease such as pediatric liver transplant. Because of the cumulative decades of experience in our group, for those that are beginning nascent programs that are developing pediatric liver transplant, it's impossible really to transmit the experience and the quality in traditional ways. And so one of the solutions that we designed was to design this network where we would provide actual clinical care, working with an established team that had some infrastructure and expertise with adult transplant and had an opportunity and a need to care for children in their state or region, and made a collaborative agreement for us to do liver transplant services in Virginia, and next year we'll be working in Florida as well. This also was important because, unfortunately, there are wide gaps in not just survival, but in other very important determinants of quality of life and complications after liver transplant in the United States. You'd be potentially shocked at some of the variations in common complications that would vary from a very low level at an expert center to as high as 80% in another part of the country. Obviously, that's not right, and it's really important that those variations in outcomes be improved. And we think that by providing this collaborative clinical and research network, that we can directly impact that outcome variation and really raise the bar of care, not just in our center and in Pittsburgh, where we've been able to do that with the resources here, but also across the country, and then logically to the world, where patients face even greater discrepancies in outcome. It's been a very labor-intensive effort, but it is one that it just really is the right thing to do. And we've had wonderful collaborations and wonderful experiences really for the teams as a result of it. Education opportunities for our team here in terms of teaching, and others, opportunities for our colleagues in Virginia and in Florida who are coming together around this new effort. And it's been a very wonderful, really coming back to the roots of what we do and why we do it, is to care for these kids, and really gathering around that and not letting necessarily barriers of institution stand in between what needs to be done.
This remarkable work, and what I'm proudest about is not just in how humble you are about the work that you're leading in that charge, but also that this is, it's a first of its kind program, nationally and globally, and it's the #1 program, right? In the video that you showed earlier, there were a lot of number ones, and that's what we're doing, through the work that you gentlemen are leading at UPMC, and we're transforming what it means to really provide care to our patients across the board. Andrew, you're the president-elect of the ATA, the American Telemedicine Association, and the ATA has been absolutely remarkable in leading the charge in telemedicine and healthcare transformation, leveraging technology. So my question to you is, as it relates to ATA and all of the things that we're talking about today, and the international audience as well, is this journey that we're talking about, is this a technical one, an operational one, or is this something else?
The journey started with the ability to connect people with technology. Who here remembers getting an ADSL in your home? It was this device, and you were so thrilled to have speeds, and now we have XLTE, and we have speeds that are almost impossible to understand in some ways, the access that we have. So we focused a lot on the tele part of telemedicine, and that's just become commonplace. I'm sure most people here have at least a computer and a phone, or a computer, phone, and iPad with them, or a phone and an iPad. Almost everybody here will probably have 2 devices. And then the operational aspects of trying to make all of this work, we realize it's just part of standard hospital and clinical operations and professional operations. It's just how you make all these things come together. The biggest issue with the journey of telemedicine right now is, what's the value of this? And how does this truly help our patients? And why do they want it? And how do they benefit from it? And when you look at the science of telemedicine, and looking at outcomes, and looking at what we're doing with comparative effectiveness research, and trying to make sure that this is truly benefiting our patients, we're starting to see the early longitudinal outcomes, that this truly adds value to healthcare. And that's one of the big journeys that we've started at the ATA, is defining value for all stakeholders. Because if you're a payer, we talk a lot about being physicians. I work actually mostly for the insurance side of UPMC. What happens is, if you are someone that actually pays for health care, the people that actually buy health care are the government and the employers and the self-insured. The payers actually manage risk and manage the care. If you look at what the payers are up against, if you are providing telemedicine services and want to add another bill, you're adding one more bill in the healthcare dollar. You're trying to get more money out of the healthcare dollar. There's no more room in the healthcare dollar. As the CEO of our health plan says, Diane Holder, there's no more room for these sorts of additive services. So what we're learning in telemedicine is it actually adds value because it pulls down costs in other areas. We know we can't keep adding to the total cost of healthcare. And so at the ATA, what we're trying to do is follow that mantra that we're hearing on our insurance company here and with others, is this has to be a replacement service. It has to add demonstrable value and be less costly than other forms of healthcare. And that we know it will be. It's just going to take us time. And I'm absolutely convinced this is going to be shown in the next 24 months or so at the ATA. We're dedicating a significant part of our efforts to that. Some of my co-board members, one, Dr. Jim Peek, used to run the VA. We have Robert Waugh, who is the president of the American Medical Association, as the global chief medical officer of CSC. So we have people like that on the board that actually see telemedicine at a global level, and we're all in the same area of this has to add value to our patients and our citizens around the world. And it will. It's just going to take us a bit of time.
That's great. So we talk a lot in the industry about moving from volume-based healthcare to value-based healthcare, and what you're doing is leading the charge to not just talk about value-based healthcare, but defining what value is so that we can measure it and we can then allow for that to happen and incentivize value-based healthcare through the managing of the risk that you talked about for the payer and the provider. So we just have a couple of minutes left before we wrap up this really engaging dialogue here with my colleagues. And I wanted to bring it home with regards to the humanistic aspect of providing care. I was in Santa Clara last week at what's called the Health 2.0 conference and talking about artificial intelligence. And one of the comments that I made is that artificial intelligence, in healthcare at least, is a misnomer. AI should really be augmented intelligence, right? All of these technologies should really augment the most humanistic aspects of what it is that we're doing and why it is that we're doing what it is that we're doing, right? So with that, what I wanted to ask you, George, is, transformational medicine, which is a theme that, of our talk today, seems to be very focused on advanced technology, right? So share with us how you blend the human touch with the high-tech environment and some of the work that you're leading to bring out the humanistic aspects of care.
Sure, thank you. Yes, I think it's been a great centerpiece of kind of our discussion that in the midst of all of the technology and the opportunities there, we really have the patient, the family at the centerpiece. And in regards to value, when we talk about this, we're talking about not just an intervention in a point in time, but an intervention hopefully for a lifetime, for a lifetime outcome. And really the community that I think exemplifies a lot of the blending of the technology with the family and the humanity that has taught us this, and that's kind of maybe even a good framework for future development is our work with the Amish and Mennonite in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. I wanted to share just a couple photos. This community has really taken and really embraced the opportunities that transplant or gene therapy or other really advanced technology, how that could transform their families. And they've done it, and they've banded together to support it and to care for them. And I wanted to, this relationship has been a decades-long one. This is a recent gathering where they brought together families and medical experts, and they presented us with this lovely quilt as a gift. And I think the last slide, just now hanging in our foyer at the hospital. But what was transforming about this quilt, and I think is a great example for us all, is that the way that they fashioned it was they asked each family who had been touched by our team through transplant, in this case through liver transplant, to form a part of the quilt. And so around the border of this quilt, you'll see 85 unique quilts that were contributed by a patient or a family as part of their transplant journey. 85 lives that are the border of this quilt, and they fashioned it to us and gave it to us as a gift. What is, every time I remember that impact, and each piece of that border, of course, has a story, has a tale, when it was made, why it was chosen. But they did that together, and I think for us and Children's and for our teams and hopefully for all of you, we're building this quilt together. We want to do it, and we want to make it as broad and as long-lasting as possible. And we use it with technology, we use it with telemedicine, but at the core is the stories that the border makes. And so, to me, that's just a daily reminder of how we need to continue to connect our technology with our families.
Thank you, George. That's a very touching story, but a real one, and it symbolizes the journey that we're all in right now, because at the end of the day, it really is about building these quilts together and making a difference in the lives of the patients that we're touching day in and day out. So the session today, this panel discussion, was really around health innovation's power to transform lives, and hopefully this discussion just lends itself to the need, the urgency for us in the industry today as a global community to really leverage the best and brightest minds out there from a clinical and academic and research perspective, as well as from a technology and a business perspective, to transform the face of healthcare by bringing these remarkable technologies and capabilities to bear. So with that, Dr. Watson and George, thank you so much, and let's carry the conversation on. Thank you.